Chester Street, Christmas. Baptist Church.
Looks like it might not be.
Let's just zoom in. Yeah. Click.
Presenting
Should I just zoom in from here?
Sound of the band, Anyway, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming this evening. My name is Phillip Lee. I'm a Member of Parliament for the Bracknell constituency. Just by way of introduction, I thought I'd just outline my involvement so far in this issue, which has generated so much local interest. In September, I hosted a public meeting down in Crowthorne at which this subject came up. My office had received a few letters at that point, if I recall rightly, from residents saying that there had been a change in flight patterns. I had absolutely no idea what they were talking about. I had no prior knowledge or contact with anybody with regards to this to forewarn my constituents. Initially, we sent out correspondence based upon a letter that I'd had from a Minister of Transport at the time about the possibility of trials in the area regards what they're trying to do is move control of planes from land-based to satellite base across Europe, and that original letter, I think, was 2011. So I issued that letter. It was then, subsequently, a week or so later, I was doing a public meeting. I do public meetings every quarter in my constituency, advertised in the press, everyone should know they take place. And at that meeting, some residents of Crowthorne pointed out to me that it felt like planes were flying through their bedrooms at 4:30 in the morning. And I realised that the degree of intrusion was much greater than I'd realised by the email correspondence I had at that point. Subsequent to that public meeting, I contacted the relevant authorities at Heathrow and made my position very clear. I said that this was not acceptable in terms of communication, let alone the noise pollution in the constituency. I think, and they probably admit this publicly, would accept that they hadn't done a very good job of communicating this trial. They told me at that point that the trial was due to go on until January. I said that that wasn't acceptable. I think it was about a week or so later, and they came back and said that they'd managed to reduce it, and I think the date was November the 12th. It was around about that sort of time in November when the trial ceased. At that point, I thought, okay, this is how this issue is dealt with, and we can move on. Unfortunately, as I understand it, the flying patterns have continued to be intrusive, primarily, I gather, because of prevailing weather conditions, and that's what I'm being told to do with the Easter election. Allow me to continue. I'm just telling you as I am heard. And as a result of that, I knew that the meeting had taken place in Ascot. I didn't attend the meeting in Ascot because it's not in my constituency. It's a parliamentary sort of protocol between members of Parliament, which is adhered to. I was aware of the meeting, could have attended, but it was Adam's meeting, not mine. And so because that constituency had a meeting, I approached Heathrow authorities and asked them to arrange a meeting in the Bracknell constituency. They organised it, they paid for it, I agreed to host it. Okay, that's clear, so everybody knows that. A lot of nonsense online saying I should have chosen a different location and this and that. It was not in my gift. I did not pay for this meeting to attend. I agreed to host it and I asked for it to take place. Now that's the facts as I see it. Just so that we're clear, I am publicly associated with supporting the expansion of Heathrow. Okay? I'm not backtracking from that, never have done. I made those comments in the Chamber in response to a question in Transport Questions about 2 or 3 years ago. I also support, by the way, the expansion of Gatwick. I don't support the expansion willy-nilly as if somehow the noise impact is irrelevant. Of course, I recognise that I've lived under the flight path of Heathrow for at least 12 years myself. They fly over my house and turn on a Sunday evening every 1 or 2 minutes, admittedly not as low as they have been doing over Great Holland and elsewhere. I am, however, I do recognise the importance of the airport to this area economically. What I support is that when they do expand Heathrow, which I suspect they will do at some point, I don't know when, I don't have some inside track, that they do it in a way that it mitigates the noise impact across the region. Okay, so we don't have the same flight paths on the same day at the same time. We all have to share the pain, so to speak, for having an advanced hub airport close to us. It isn't ideal. No one's suggesting that it is ideal to have an airport in West London. It's not ideal to have an airport at City University if you sit on the terrace at Westminster. It's quite remarkable. They are where they are, okay? And so on balance, I am broadly supportive of Heathrow expansion. This evening, however, is not about that. This evening is about a meeting to discuss the trials, which are solely about trying to improve the way in which air traffic is controlled, not only over Britain, but across Europe, moving towards a satellite-based system, which will lead to using less aviation fuel. And those of you in the room who believe in climate change should want that. And also is about trying to reduce noise pollution because the planes are on the ground, they're not in the air. And facilitating economic development by facilitating more flights in the European region. Okay? I wanted to make this all clear at the start, so that there's no sense that I'm backing away from previous statements. It's not my style. I wanted you to know for sure, in clear terms, what my position on Heathrow Airport and indeed Gatwick Airport is. You may not agree with that position, but I think it's important that, as your Member of Parliament, that you know that. Now, without further ado, I want to turn to the matter of the evening, which is the three people to my left and right who know much, much more about these issues than I ever will. I don't know which order, can you go, is that end, right? Matt Gorman is Director of Environment at Heathrow, and he will address the meeting first.
Dr. Lee, could I just ask you one question before we move on?
Sure.
Please, thank you. Just in response to what you just said. Could I just ask you, please, if you, in your support of the expansion of Heathrow, is that representing the views of your constituents?
Well, I must make this quick. Can I look? As I said, this meeting, if we want to have a meeting about discussing Heathrow expansion, please, we can have that meeting. This isn't this meeting. But you've asked me the straight question. The difficulty as a Member of Parliament is I'm not a delegate, I'm a trustee. Okay? The opinions of my constituents, in my experience on all issues, are pretty diverse. Okay? And there is a large majority in this constituency who rely economically on working at both Heathrow and at Gatwick directly, and there's a significant proportion of this constituency who rely upon the indirect benefits of that airport being close by. Of course, there will be people, and indeed, I don't know how many of you are my constituents, by the way, I have no idea because it's impossible to decide. You're all free to be here, but I don't actually know how representative this is of my constituency because I don't know how many of you are my constituents. But in answer to your question, I'm elected to represent the best interests of my constituents. I'm not elected to represent every individual opinion of my constituents because, yeah, so it's less than half. Oh, well, okay. Well, I wouldn't say it's 90%, but it's a majority.
You can slow down the way out and try
Okay. Yeah, I'm interested, madam, because I've asked a direct question. The point is that I'm a trustee. Okay, to vote on in your best interests. You might not think it's your best interest, but I'm invested with that responsibility to do so. That's how a parliamentary representative democracy works. The most letters I've had as an MP have been on badges. Okay, the second subject I've had most letters on is air passenger duty. Okay, and that air passenger duty campaign was actually pushed by the airlines. It's quite instructive that that's the most letters I've had, that's separate from badges, i.e. a lot of people wanting air passenger duty to be reduced because it was impacting upon their lives. Okay, so it's very difficult for me to sit here and tell you I know what my constituents' individual position on one subject is, but I'm pretty sure that the majority of people in my constituency recognise the value of Heathrow in its close proximity. Sorry, sir, I think the purpose of the meeting is not to ask questions of me. I'm hosting this so that these gentlemen can tell you about these trials and what's been happening. At the end, if there's time before 9 o'clock, I'm happy to answer questions on anything you like.
If there's time.
But if well, I don't know how long their presentations are, so...
Well, there better be time.
Shall I pick up then? And let me introduce myself and a couple of colleagues who are with me tonight and explain what we're going to talk through briefly, and it is a relatively brief presentation we have before we give a chance for any questions here. So my name is Matt Gorman. I am Sustainability and Environment Director at Heathrow Airport. I'm joined here today by Ian Johnson from NATS, the National Air Traffic Service provider in the UK, the people who manage the planes in the skies above our heads, and Dan Foster, also from NATS, but seconded into Heathrow to help us with some of our work on airspace. I'll put up a brief running order just to give you a sense of the issues that we'll cover, and then just say a few words of introduction. So I've done the introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about the UK's future airspace strategy. As Phillip Lee said, a move from land-based to satellite-based navigation, and what that means. We'll talk a bit about how airspace works today, a bit about some of the trials that we've been doing that are now finished, and some of the opportunities for future and the next steps. I think the first thing, obviously, is to welcome you all, to thank you all for coming here tonight and giving us the opportunity to talk about these trials and to answer, I think, the many questions that you have. We've heard of a number of questions that Phillip Lee's had, and we're very happy to be here to answer those questions. I think the first thing I'd like to do as well is to acknowledge the local reaction that we've had to these trials. We do know that these trials for some people have resulted in a greater concentration of planes over areas and over locations that had fewer in the past. We know that's caused some distress, some strong feeling, and we're sorry for that. The trials have...
The trials were supposed to have stopped already and they haven't.
If we keep interrupting, we will never finish.
The trials have now finished. They finished on the 12th of November. Okay. We haven't lied. I said, can I say a few words? I may ask Phillip Lee to help me in chairing the session in a second. I am aware there are some very strong feelings on this. We have come with as much information as we can and a real willingness to answer your questions. However, in order for us to do that, I would really ask that you let me go through the few slides I've got to explain what we've been doing. We hope to answer some of the questions because we have a good sense from the information we've received of the kind of questions that people have. But if I am constantly interrupted...
I think we know what you've been doing and we know why you're doing it. But the thing is...
Okay, if I'm constantly interrupted, we're going to make no progress. There will be ample time for questions. I'm going to carry on now with my presentation. And Phillip Lee, if I'm continuing...
Please, everyone, can we just make some progress, and at the end,
You
you'll be
have
free...
to 8 o'clock, no further. 8 o'clock, no further.
So it's the chair of the meeting.
Sorry, 8 o'clock, sorry.
I'm not following.
Yeah. You said you got till 9 o'clock, you've got 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, it's questions. They won't be short-changed this time.
Madam, with respect,
You're not going to short-changed.
with respect, I'm chairing the meeting. We're here till 9 o'clock. There's going to be 3 presentations. I'm pretty confident they're going to be short enough for there to be long enough to ask questions at the end.
There will. We're anticipating around 15 minutes of presentation. 15 to 20, that's what we've done before. But if I am constantly interrupted, it will be longer. So I would please ask that you just let me carry on through the presentation. The trials have now finished. They finished on the 12th of November, and that was partly, as Phillip Lee said, in response to some of the public feedback we had. These are joint trials between ourselves at the airport and NATS, and we concluded that actually we could gather sufficient data through the trials in a shorter period of time. They were originally scheduled to run until the end of January and then finished in November. It's worth explaining a little bit what these trials are part of as well. They're part of a UK government programme, in turn part of a European programme to modernise the UK's airspace by 2020. And this isn't just something for Heathrow, this is something that affects all airports in the UK. Every airport has been asked to submit plans to modernise the airspace around it, the routes that planes use in the skies above us. I hope that the presentation should answer some of the questions you have. Obviously, we'll be happy to take questions afterwards. I do know that the trials have aroused strong feelings. I've acknowledged that, and I think part of that stems from a concern about understandably, what the future might hold. I think one of the key points I'd like to make up front is this is new territory for all of us. Airspace in the UK, not just around Heathrow, hasn't really changed for about 50 or so years now. It's used the same technology on the ground, the same technology in aircraft. But that is now changing. We are, as an industry, as an airport, as an industry as a whole, we've been required by Europe to modernise airspace across Europe, and similar programmes are happening in the US and in other parts of the world as new technology comes in. But what we're really keen to do is to find a solution that works for the aviation industry, but that also means for the travelling public, by making journeys even safer than they are today, by making journeys more efficient and more punctual, but equally to find a solution that works for the communities that live next to and around airports, by finding better ways to manage noise, to allow planes to climb more steeply and therefore to be quieter around airports, and also, as Phillip Lee says, to share the noise around airports more fairly, offering people predictable times with and without aircraft noise, which is a key message that we hear that people would like. There are lots of things we're learning along the way, and one of those is that we do need to communicate better. We did communicate with MPs and neighbouring and local authorities in the immediate vicinity of the airport, but it's absolutely true, we acknowledge it, that we've had more feedback from areas further from the airport than we were expecting, and we clearly need to learn from that. We need to communicate better in future if we do future trials. I hope that the fact...
Can you speak up? I can't hear you.
Okay. I hope that the fact that we're here tonight is evidence that we are prepared to engage. I think it's also worth saying, although the trials are finished at the moment, this is part of a multi-year process to improve airspace. So I think the conversation, the debate on this will continue for some time. It is worth saying as well that my final point before I hand on to colleagues, any final changes to airspace in the UK around Heathrow or elsewhere will have to be subject to government approval. They'll be part of a public consultation and subject to government approval. So although we're doing some trials as required by government, we're not, as an industry, it wouldn't be right in a democracy that we decide what's right. Ultimately, that's a government decision. So I'm going to hand over now to Ian, who's going to explain a little bit about the future airspace strategy that I talked about, and then Dan will explain more specifically some of the Heathrow trials.
So just to introduce myself, Ian Jobson, I'm Head of Environmental and Community Affairs at NATS, the UK Air Traffic Service Provider. A little bit about NATS. We are, as I said, the air traffic service provider for the UK and the first half of the North Atlantic, transatlantic traffic. We control, or we handle around 2.1, 2.2 million flights a year, around 6,000 flights a day. UK has some very, very busy airspace, and I think one thing that's really important that you can take away nothing about NATS from tonight is that it's our job to keep the airspace above all of our heads the safest in the world, and that's my prime concern. But at the same time, we also seek to reduce the environmental impact where possible of the air traffic that we control, working in collaboration with airports. I'm not going to read through that. I know that you all want to ask questions, but the key message is that the Future Airspace Strategy is a government and civil aviation authority sponsored initiative. It's to modernise the airspace over the UK. It's part of a bigger European programme to make airspace more efficient, even safer than it is now, and it's sponsored by the Civil Aviation Authority. So we've been asked, with airports, to test some of this new technology. I'm going to talk to you a bit about this new technology that we've been trying recently. But the trials that we're doing, we're not just doing them at Heathrow, we've done them at Stansted, at Gatwick, we've done them at some of the Scottish airports. We will continue to do these trials in order to understand how we best can support the government and the Civil Aviation Authority in implementing the Future Airspace Strategy. So, a little bit about airspace over the UK today, or more specifically, the airspace over the London area. So the airspace over the London area is the second busiest piece of airspace in the world. This is a picture of the tracks for 1 day's worth of operations from the main airports in the London area. And it's important also to note that these are only aircraft under below 20,000 feet. There's a whole bunch more aircraft between 20,000 feet and about 40,000 feet that are also going across this area. So what you'll see there is a very complex picture. And our controllers are expert in keeping those aeroplanes apart, keeping them safely separated from each other. And it is a very, very safe system. It's very systemised.